Well, shalom, dear friends, and welcome to our Genesis Bible study. Today we're going to be in chapter 30, and this is a fairly lengthy chapter, and my PowerPoint stuff, my preliminary stuff, is getting pretty lengthy. So I think we will just charge into that. Once again, if you just want to do the chapter by chapter and verse by verse commentary, I encourage you to fast forward through the PowerPoint material, and when you come to the word processor with Genesis 30, just start it up there. We will also kind of briefly go through quickly through some of the PowerPoint stuff. So if there's anything you want to read more thoroughly or examine more thoroughly, just pause the video as we go through it and spend as much time as you want on that. So without any further hesitation, let's begin. Lately, I have been advertising my latest book that has been published. It's called Nazarene Essene Theology. It is a systematic theology of the whole Bible from a Nazarene Essene perspective. The Nazarenes were the sect of Judaism that Yeshua, Jesus, was associated with. The Essenes were kind of a sister sect or denomination, best known for the having produced and then hidden away and preserved the Dead Sea Scrolls. So yeah, this book covers from Genesis to Revelation, and there's quite a bit of material in there drawn from the book of Genesis. So if you'd like to get a hold of a copy of that, my books are all available on Amazon. This is the dispensational chart that we've been looking at. It's called the Age of Promise, where God chooses one particular family and blesses them, establishes a covenant with them. The patriarchs are Avram, whose name God changes to Avraham, Yitzhak, whose name doesn't get changed. Then we have Yaakov, or Jacob, whose name gets changed to Israel. Those are the first three generations. And in the text for today, we are going to be talking a lot about the 12 sons of Jacob, who will later become the patriarchs, the ancestors of the 12 tribes of Israel, the nation of Israel. I'd like to point out that the red ribbon or the red road of redemption runs through these three generations and then passes through the tribe of Yehuda or Judah. That's the tribe Jesus or Yeshua came from. It was the tribe of nobility. The kings of Israel came from this tribe, whereas the priests and the Levites, the kind of workers in the tabernacle and the temple, came from the tribe of Levi. So it passes through there into the captivity in Egypt, which we will discuss a little bit in the last chapters of Genesis. But that's as far as we'll go. The next dispensational chart is called the Age of Law, where Moses is kind of the main character, especially at the beginning of that story. We've been looking at maps of the Middle East. This one is entitled The Migration of Abraham. The red lines indicate the probable, and the dotted lines the possible travels of Abraham. And these travels are significant because in two Bible verses, one in Genesis 13, the other in Genesis 15, God defines the promised land that he gives to this family, Abraham, Yitzhak, and Yaakov, in terms of land that they would see with their eyes and walk on with their feet. That's in Genesis 13. And then in Genesis 15, he geographically defines the boundaries as running from the river of Egypt to the great river Euphrates. River of Egypt is probably the Nile over here, so that would serve as the western boundary. And in the next map that we will look at, we will see that Abraham and Sarah did travel to the Nile River, and later the whole nation would live in the land of Goshen, which is kind of up here in the northeastern part of the Nile River Delta. And then the Euphrates River begins up here in, I think these are the Caucasus Mountains, and runs down to the southeast to the Persian Gulf. Ur of the Kasdim, or the Chaldeans, is Abraham's birthplace. Then we have the travels of Abraham and Sarah in around Canaan, but also this shows the trip into Egypt to show that they at least made it to the western boundary. This map is called The Travels of Jacob. So we've been looking at this large scale map where his travels, he starts here in just to the west of the Dead Sea, travels up north to Padan Aram. This is the extended family's kind of residence up there. It was Abraham, Sarah, and their nephew Lot that traveled with them down into the promised land. Now Jacob is back up in this territory, and he's looking for a bride. Rivka, Rebecca, Isaac's wife, was also chosen from the extended family up there. And then we've got a larger scale map that shows the travels around it was then called the land of Canaan. Later it will be called the land of Israel. So we don't really need to look at that today because he's already up in Padan Aram. One kind of interesting thing that I came across in Genesis 25 was this reference to Jacob and his brother Esau. And verse 27 says, the boys grew, and Esau was a skillful hunter, a man of the field. And we have seen that in their stories so far, but it says Jacob was a mild man dwelling in tents. He was kind of a homebody. He was his mom's favorite. But the Hebrew word there that is used to describe him as a mild man is the word tam, and it has to do with moral and I guess other characteristics too regarding excellence. Sometimes it's even translated with the word perfect. So this word tam, which is used to describe Jacob, means complete, usually morally pious. Specifically gentle, dear, kind of goes along with the mild man thing, coupled together, perfect, plain, undefiled, upright. And when I read that, I had to laugh because the stereotype that I have always had of Jacob is that he was kind of a dirty rat. He was a trickster. He cheated his brother, I thought, out of first the birthright and then the blessing of the firstborn from his father's hand. But with this word tam, the Hebrew word tam in mind, describing Jacob in all these really holy kind of terms, I thought we should, from that point on, see if we can read this into the story of Jacob. And today we're going to come across an episode in Jacob's life where some cheating takes place, but he's not really the one who does the cheating. He gets cheated, but I think the story today will depict him as a man of faith who trusts God to provide for him, even though another individual is kind of treating him, we would say, dishonestly. So keep that in mind. Jacob may be a Tom rather than a dirty rat. We have been looking for quite a while at the family tree of Abraham. So we've traced it from his dad, Terah, down to Abraham and his wife, Sarah, and even the child that was produced by the maidservant Hagar. Isaac is the second generation of the promised people. Jacob and Esau are the third generation. And now we're going to start talking about the 12 tribes of Israel. So we can kind of jump past that chart and look at this one. This is Jacob and his two wives, who he was legitimately married to, Leah and Rachel, and then Zilpah and Bilhah were the maidservants of each of the wives of Yaakov. And he is going to have children by all four of these gals. What we need to know right up front is that Rachel, Jacob's favorite, she was the one that he fell head over heels in love with, and bargained with her father to work 7 years for her. But he ended up getting kind of tricked by Lavan, that's Rachel and Leah's father, tricks him into first marrying Leah, the firstborn, culturally the one who should have gotten married first, and then another 7 years to get Rachel. And so he ends up with them. There's a lot of competition between these two. So each of these girls brings their maidservant into the picture to try to win Jacob's favor. Rachel's servant Bilhah goes first, produces, I think, one child, and then Leah gets her maidservant Zilpah involved, because after Leah had born 4 children, then she was unable to conceive for a while. Later, she will bear 2 more children. So Zilpah gets in the act also. And these are the 2 sons of Zilpah, Gad and Asher. And these are the 2 of Bilhah, Rachel's maidservant. They are Dan and Naphtali. I spent quite a bit of time in the last chapter looking at, from Dake's, Finest Dake's study Bible, 4 proofs that Jacob took his wives immediately, which means that Jacob made a deal to work 7 years for Rachel. He was tricked. The girl he ended up marrying first was Leah. And you could, just a surface reading of the text would give you the impression that Jacob worked 7 years and then got Leah, had to work 7 more years to get Rachel. So he had been working for Laban for like 14 years before he's able to marry Rachel. But what actually takes place is that Jacob made kind of a down payment of working for a shorter period of time, maybe a week, maybe as long as a year, before he married Leah, and then probably the same short length of time before he was able to marry Rachel. So both girls kind of get busy producing kids pretty much right away. And so the full, it's about a 20-year period that Jacob will be in this territory. So there's plenty of time for all these kids to not only be born, but grow to kind of a mature age. So the rest of the chronology of Genesis makes sense. If you'd like to read through all this material here and kind of look up the cross references, I just encourage you to pause the video and do that to your heart's content. And then when you are finished, this is the rest of the story. This page on the PowerPoint is the rest of the story of why those wives of his got busy having children right away. So what are there? 3, I guess, 1, 2, 3. Looks like 3 pages of that story. So go through those at your own rate. And meanwhile, I am going to go to our word processor, and we will begin looking at Genesis 30, starting with the first verse. Now, when Rachel saw that she bore Yaakov no children, Rachel envied her sister and said to Yaakov, "Give me children, or else I die." In the last chapter, I think Leah had 2, maybe 3, maybe as many as 4 children, and then stopped bearing children. So all that time, I assume Rachel has been trying to conceive with Jacob, having no success with that, being very frustrated, knowing that her and in the biblical era, a barrenness was considered a curse from God, or at least not being under God's blessing. And the ability to conceive and bear children was thought to be an indication of being blessed by God. So, Rachel is very discouraged at this point, as is very understandable. And she says to Jacob, "Give me children or else I die." In other words, if I can't have children by you, my life is meaningless and I would be better off dead. Maybe a little kind of extreme understanding of her situation, but I think understandable, particularly if you're a woman and very much desirous of having children and for one reason or another are not able to. She knows the conception problem is not with her husband because he has produced children by Leah, his other wife. Verse 2, and Yaakov's anger was aroused against Rachel, and he said, "Am I in the place of God who has withheld from you the fruit of the womb?" Now, in our day and age, we would look at medical explanations for failure to conceive. And some of those can be addressed by medicine, by therapeutic procedures. Some cannot. But I think in biblical times, conception and barrenness were both thought to be decisions, choices, elections that God had made. And for whatever reason, God was not allowing her to conceive. And so, Jacob is saying, "Don't blame me. This is not my doing. Have this out with God." So verse 3, she said, that's Rachel said, "Here is my maid Bilhah. Go into her, and she will bear a child on my knees, that I also may have children by her." Now, the way this concept worked was that since Rachel was actually Jacob's wife, but Bilhah had been given to her by her father. This is a servant girl. Uh, she would Bilhah would be thought to be um, uh, what a something um, that Rachel owned, property of Rachel. So if Bilhah conceives and bears a child, the understanding would be that although Bilhah was the one who got pregnant and delivered the child, because she was the property of Rachel, Rachel could claim motherhood, I guess, claim possession of the child as her own. And this was the same idea that Sarah had when Sarah had been barren for so long. She made a deal with Abraham to sleep with her maidservant, an Egyptian servant girl named Hagar, and that relationship produced Ishmael, the ancestor of some of the Arab people groups. So Rachel says, "Here's my maid, go unto her, that she may bear a child on my knees." Um, the phraseology here, I think it probably means that after the child is born, he'll be placed on my lap, and I will be considered his mother, that I may also have children by her. Um, this kind of thing happens today. Sometimes couples who can't bear children will have a surrogate mother to conceive, either by the actual father or by maybe the surrogate's husband, and and bear children in that way. And then those children are, I suppose, they're legally adopted into the family. And so, I mean, we still do the surrogate mother thing, even in our advanced society. So verse 4, then she gave him Bilhah, her maid, as wife, and Yaakov went into her. Oftentimes when the Bible talks about sexual relations with one's wife or some other person in kind of a negative way, it uses the verb to know, K-N-O-W, yada in Hebrew. So for a husband to know his wife will mean to have sexual relations. This is a bit more descriptive. He went into her. And, if you understand how human sexuality works, that's a very descriptive way of saying that they had sexual relations. Verse 5, and Bilhah conceived and bore Yaakov a son. When then Rachel said, God has judged. And we want to take a look at the word judge here because the root word is the Hebrew word dan, and it would be spelled D-A-N and pronounced dan, and it means to judge. So she says, God has judged my case. In other words, I am really sad about my inability to conceive, and God has seen that, and he's judging in my favor. The word dan can also refer to justice. God has given justice in my favor. He has also heard my voice. In other words, I've been praying to him about this, and he has given me a son. Now, it came from another woman, but again, we understand how the surrogate thing works. So Rachel is considering this her son. Therefore, she, Rachel, called his name Dan. So that's the word for a judge, or also, it could be considered justice. There's another Hebrew word that's used kind of the same way. I would call it a synonym, and that's the word shofet. The shoftim were the judges, like the book of Judges, Samson and Yeftach and all the other ones, Gideon and so forth, were the judges. And that word, shofet, can also mean to give justice. So she names this child by Bilhah. She names him Dan, which means judge or justice. And Rachel's maid Bilhah conceived again and bore Yaakov a second son. And when Rachel said, with great wrestlings, Naphtali is one of the Hebrew words that means wrestling. Another one is the word sar, um, which also means wrestling, but it has, I don't know, that's kind of a derived meaning of sar. Sar is the Hebrew word for a prince. And we'll talk about that later when Yaakov wrestles with God. So, this word Naphtali means she's having great wrestlings. With great wrestlings, I've wrestled with my sister, and indeed I have prevailed. Now, when we come to the word sar, the alternative word, it has to do with wrestling and prevailing. It has to do with being victorious in a wrestling match. So not only is Rachel upset with her husband because he hasn't caused her to conceive, but she's also wrestling with her sister, not literally, but struggling with her sister. And now because she has a couple of kids, she is feeling like those wrestlings with her sister have gotten her what she wants. So she, Rachel, called his name, the child's name, Naphtali. And that's the same word we have as Naphtali means wrestling, and Naphtali is the child's name. So this is maybe the first indication that we have that Rachel is not getting along all that well with her sister Leah. Don't know what their relationship was before they got married to Yaakov, but it apparently is not real good right now. Now, from Rachel's perspective, Leah is the one who is blessed by God. She's conceiving all these children. Raquel thinks that Leah is probably going to be Jacob's favorite. But Leah probably just kind of looks at circumstances and realizes that Rachel is the one that Yaakov first fell in love with. So she thinks Rachel is the favorite wife. And so, there's this different perspective from both of these gals, and both of them feel like they're getting the short end of the stick. So competition between these wives is not a good thing as far as harmony in the family is concerned. Now, when Leah saw that she had stopped bearing, and I think that was after the fourth child that she had, she took Zilpah, her maid, and gave her to Yaakov as wife. So if it's good for the goose, it's good for the moose, right? So if this is working out in Rachel's favor, then Leah says, well, I've got a maid servant too, so I'll play that game also. And Leah's maid Zilpah bore Yaakov a son. Uh, and after Zilpah bore a son, then Leah said, because Leah is going to claim Zilpah's children as her own also. So Leah said, a troop comes. The word troop is the Hebrew word God, and it would be spelled G-A-D, but pronounced God. Don't get that confused with the English word God for God, G-O-D. Different word. So Leah said, a troop comes. Now, I want to look at the Hebrew for a moment, and we'll just kind of go through this word for word. It's just a short sentence. It starts with a conjunction, va, which means and. Tomer means that Leah was saying. Omar means to speak. And Leah, this is her word that is her name that's highlighted here. Leah is the one doing the speaking. And she says, um, uh, at least let me put it this way. This is what is written. This word here, Bet, Gimel, Dalet. These three letters here are what is written in the Masoretic text of the Old Testament, the Hebrew text. But this part right here is what is read when this is seen. So what is printed in the text is called the ketiv, and it's just the Hebrew word that means what's written. This part in the brackets is called the kere, which means that's the word for what is read. So really, what is written here, be God, doesn't make any sense in the text. And so that's why the Masoretes said that the way this should be read is ba, one word, and God, the second word. And what that means in English is a troop comes. The way it's written, it just means in a troop, which doesn't make any sense. Not just because the English says a troop comes, but ba, one word, and God, another, means a troop comes. So she's already got 4 kids. This is number 5 that comes by Zilpah. And so she called his name God, which is the Hebrew word for a troop. Okay. And Leah's maid. Oh, by the way, there are a lot of examples of this Ketiv and Kere in the Old Testament. And what it's usually chalked up to is just when copying the text, scribes would maybe not leave enough space between 2 words, or they maybe run 2 words together, or, they make these minor little mistakes. But the Masoretes were, very conscientious about noting those differences in the margins and having Ketiv and Kere. So you get the best shot of knowing what the Hebrew Old Testament says. So verse 12, and Leah's maid Zilpah bore Yaakov a second son. And then Leah said, even though it was Zilpah who did the birthing, Leah said, I am happy. And the Hebrew word for being happy is asher. Asher. And it's highlighted here. The 3-letter root word is aleph, shin, resh, and it means to be happy. Now, one thing I will say about this word is in the New Testament, Jesus gives the Sermon on the Mount, and the first part of the Sermon on the Mount is called the Beatitudes. And a lot of English versions will translate the word that's used there, ashrei. They'll translate that as blessed. And it's not really wrong, but blessedness means just being in a state of being blessed because you're in a relationship with God. And blessedness does not change with circumstances. Ashrei, happiness, depends on what happens. That's why they call it happiness. And so that is, the result of circumstances. So when this child is born, Leah says, I am happy, Asher. So she's talking about her circumstances. A new child has been born. She can claim possession of it. And so that makes her happy. So she exclaims, I am happy, for the daughters will call me blessed. Now, this is kind of a challenging part of the Hebrew. Ish wu ni, I guess it's not really saying blessed as in our English. It's saying happy. Um, like somebody will be calling me, happy. And who is it that will be doing that? It is the benot. That's the word for daughters. So she may be anticipating that she is going to have daughters. Well, the Bible tells us that she will have one daughter named Dinah. But this could be an indication that she's talking about having more daughters that possibly she did have, and the Bible just doesn't tell us about them. But it could also be a reference to like the women in the community, my neighbors, who I would refer to as the daughters of the community. They will be the ones who will be calling me happy, not really blessed, happy, because there is a difference between blessedness and happiness. So she called his name Asher, and that's the word for happiness. Speaking of the Beatitudes, the Ashereh is how that's translated in all of the Hebrew language New Testaments. It means happy. Some time ago, Robert Schuller, who was pretty famous for being the pastor of the Crystal Cathedral out in, Garden Grove, California. And he wrote a lot of books, and a lot of Christians just loved him, thought he was the best thing since sliced bread. Others were very critical of him. But he wrote a book about the Beatitudes, and it was called The Be Happy Attitudes. And whether you like Schuller or not, he got it right on that book. He understood the term Asher. Okay, verse 14. Now, Reuven. Now, just as kind of a recollection here, Reuven is the first child that was born to Jacob and Leah. Okay, he's the oldest son. So, in all the lists of the 12 sons of Jacob, Reuben usually comes in at the top. So he went in the days of the wheat harvest and found mandrakes. Now, I'm going to go to my Dake Study Bible notes about mandrakes and get his description of it, because I don't know, it's kind of an unfamiliar word to me. So a mandrake is a dark green lettuce-like plant with purple flowers and red fruit, about the size of a small apple, with a pleasant smell. They were used in so-called love potions, or what's the other word for that? Aphrodisiacs. For it was believed that conception was ensured by eating it. Arabs later called them fruit apples of Satan. It says for some unknown reason, but I can imagine that they, since the fruit of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil is not identified, maybe the Arabs thought that it was a mandrake. And that makes the eating of the apple have something to do with bearing children and so forth. Rachel felt that she needed the mandrakes more than Leah, whom God had made fruitful without them, while Rachel remained unfruitful in spite of eating them and having faith in superstition. So Dake calls this idea of mandrakes making it easier to conceive, calls that a superstition. I would tend to believe, but maybe there are some, things that you can eat or medicines that you can take that, make it easier for you to conceive. But I'm going to have a tendency to kind of side with Dake and say this is a superstition that people thought this was maybe a cure for barrenness. And we'll just leave it there. So he found mandrakes in the field and he brought them to his mother, Leah. Now remember, she has quit bearing too. She had 4 children and then quit bearing. That's why she gave her maidservant to Yaakov instead of bearing these children herself. So then Rachel said to Leah, please give me some of your son's mandrakes. So it's like, I'm barren, and whether this is superstition or legit, I'd like to try the mandrakes and see if I can get pregnant and have a baby. But she said to her, and the she saying this is Leah, said to her, is it a small matter that you have taken away my husband? Now, this hints at something that isn't actually described in the text, but I get the impression that, that Jacob is doing his husbandly duty with Leah. Remember, she's not the one that he's head over heels in love with. As long as she's having children, he is continuing to sleep with her because he wants a big family. And once she stops having children, I would guess, and it sounds like this is the case based on Leah's words here, that he may have stopped sleeping with her. Still trying to have kids with Rachel. So from Leah's perspective, Rachel has taken away her husband. Would you take away my son's mandrakes also? So both of the girls are in need of the mandrakes because neither one of them can bear now. The maidservants are in that role now in both of their lives. So Rachel said, therefore he will lie with you tonight for your son's mandrakes. So I don't know how many mandrakes there were, but it sounds like to me, Leah is saying, or Rachel is saying, well, you sleep with him tonight with your son's mandrakes and see what happens. And then give the mandrakes to me, or give me some of the mandrakes, and then like I'll sleep with him tomorrow night. So the girls are deciding whom Jacob is going to sleep with on what night, and they only have their own interests at heart. When Yaakov came out of the field in the evening, Leah went out to meet him and said, you must come in to me, for I have surely hired you with my son's mandrakes. Now, this is what every husband wants to hear. I made a business deal and I won, because of that deal. It's like, I'm paying for you to sleep with me tonight. So, if Jacob is a good guy, this is going to make him feel kind of cheap. And she didn't say, oh, Jacob, you're so handsome and I can't resist you, or you're just the love of my life and I've missed you so much. I hired you with my son's mandrakes. And he lay with her that night. So if he is a dirty rat, he's getting to sleep with somebody and he doesn't care why. But if if he's an upstanding guy, a business deal's been made, so he's going to honor it. And, maybe it's not all that unpleasant sleeping with Leah. Verse 17, and God listened to Leah, and she conceived and bore Jacob a 5th son. So her period of barrenness is over with. She has yet a 5th son. So after the 4th son, that was over with. Leah said, God has given me my wages. The Hebrew word for wage is sakar, and it's highlighted there in the Hebrew text. Because I have given my maid to my husband. She's looking at this as a wages, I paid good mandrakes for this, and now I've conceived. And, so God has honored this deal that I made. I've given my maid to my husband, so she called his name, the child's name that Leah bore is Issachar is the way it's usually pronounced. The word is here, and it's actually pronounced a little more awkwardly than that. What we have here is a yod, which is the first consonant in this name. Then there's a hirek, which is an I sound below it. That's the vowel. The second consonant we have is what is called a seen, which is this kind of, kind of like a three finger symbol there. But that has a dot in it, which means that this consonant is actually pronounced twice. Then we have the same consonant, seen again, but no dot in it. So that would actually be the third pronunciation of the S sound. And then we have kaf and resh. The kaf is the K sound, and the resh is the R sound. So this would be pronounced Yis Sas Kar. Yisas Kar. You could even stretch that out a little more and say it's Yisasakar. So again, it's an awkward to pronounce name. And even though there are three S sounds indicated in the text, I think most people pronounce it Issachar. So we'll just go with Issachar. It's easier to say than Issachar. Then Leah conceived again and bore Yaakov a sixth son. And Leah said, God has endowed me with a good endowment. Now my husband will dwell with me. And dwell is the English word that we want to look at in the Hebrew, and it is yizavuleni. We want to look at the three-letter root word of this, and it is Z or Zain, Bet, a B sound, and Lamed, an L sound. So the root word is Zaval, Zaval. And it does mean to dwell. If you look at the information window at the bottom of the page, you see the root word there, Zaval, and it means to dwell. So let's finish this verse, and then we'll talk a little bit about Zaval. So good announcement. My husband will dwell with me because I've borne him six sons. So she called his name Zvulun, and Zvulun, again, kind of a strange name, hard to pronounce. But we want to focus on the Zaval, the root word here, because it is there. I think they call this noon, the N sound at the end. I think that's a pedagogic noon. It can also be one way in Hebrew that you take a verb and turn it into a noun by adding a noon on the end of it, or a mem or an m sound at the beginning. But let's talk about Zaval. In order to do that, yes, we've established that it means to dwell. But I want to talk about a Philistine god that the Philistines called Baal Zavuv or Zabub. In your Bibles, you will probably come across the term Baal Zabub or Baal Zavul. So the Philistines called their god Baal Zavuv or Baal Zabub. And that means, Baal means Lord. And because they called so many of their gods Baal, we have a tendency to think of that being Lord, meaning like a false god, and usually it is that. But the word Baal can also mean like a husband of a wife, even in Hebrew. Like wives will call their husband Baali, my Lord, my husband, the one God has given me to rule my house. But Zebub is I guess, the Philistine word for a fly, like a house fly. So Baal-zebub means Lord of the Flies. Now, the Hebrews, when they had their dealings with the Philistines, came to realize that the Philistines called their god, one of their gods, Baal-zebub, or Zabu, Zavu, Zavuv, Baal-zevuv, and they meant Lord of the Flies. But they recognize that this is very similar to their word, the Hebrew word Zavul, with an L instead of a B on the end of it. And so if they were being nice to the Philistines, they could say that their God was Baal, like the Lord of uh, Zavul, the dwelling place, like Lord of the manor, Lord of the house. But this word Zavul in Hebrew is also the word for garbage. In modern Hebrew, it means garbage. In biblical Hebrew, it means like the dung heap. So the Hebrews had fun changing the name of the Philistine god from Baal-zebub to Baal-zevul. Um, Usually, I mean, you have to figure out what the Hebrews meant by that. Did they mean Lord of the household, or did they mean Lord of the dung heap or Lord of the garbage pit? Probably the latter. So there's a little lesson on the Hebrew word zavua. Verse 21, afterward, she bore a daughter. That's Leah, bore a daughter and called her name Dinah. She doesn't proclaim anything. This name Dinah is actually the feminine version of the name Dan or Dan. For the feminine version, you add a hey on the end of it. That makes it feminine. And in this case, we've got a Herrick yod added in the middle. Actually, I think there's a yod in Dean also. So anyway, this is the feminine version of Don. So her name is Dinah. And she is going to play a major role in the life of the family, Jacob's family, in chapters to come. So don't forget about Dinah. We always talk about the 12 sons of Jacob, and Dinah, the one daughter that's mentioned, is hardly ever mentioned. And it's unfortunate. But again, she will play a prominent role, kind of a tragic role in this story when we continue and when we get to that. So verse 22, then God remembered Rachel, and God listened to her and opened her womb. So it sounds like God really was keeping her from bearing children. But he has mercy on her and he opens her womb. One of the words for mercy is racham, and that is also the Hebrew word for a womb. So God remembers Rachel and opens her womb, and she conceived and bore a son and said, Elohim, God has taken away my reproach. Let's see. What do we have here? Away, Asaph. I don't know if I can make anything out of that or not. We're, like each one of the names of the sons so far is explained by some proclamation that the mom makes. So here's Rachel having her first child, and she makes a proclamation. God has taken away Asaph. It's highlighted there in the Hebrew. It's Aleph, Samek, and Pei. That's the final version of the Pei or the P sound. Taken away my reproach, Herpa. So she called his name Yosef and said, the Lord shall add to me another son. The word add here is Yosef, which is similar to Asaph. Asaph means to gather, and Yosef means to add to or to repeat. So I'm trying to figure out, I think these two words are related. So is she calling his name Yosef because God has taken away reproach, or because she's hoping God will add to me another son? The safest one to go with is add to Yosef, and it is a yod that is in his name. So we'll say Yosef's name means add to. Now, immediately, Yosef becomes his father's favorite son. And he is like the second to the youngest. He's one of the last ones born, but he's his father's favorite. So Reuben is going to be put off by this. All of the sons of Leah are going to be put off by this. And now Rachel is having a child of her own. So guess who becomes the favorite wife at this point? Even though Leah has had way more kids than Rachel. And then you add, the maidservant girls who are mother to, in a sense, in a surrogate sense, to these kids. All of this adds to more family dysfunction. Jealousies and so forth are in they're very prominent in the family at this time. Okay, verse 25. And it came to pass when Rachel had born Yosef that Yaakov said to Lavan, remember Lavan is her husband, I'm sorry, her father. Uh, Jacob says to Lavan, send me away that I may go to my own place and my own country. Now, this is what he planned to do all along. And he worked 14 years for these two girls. Now the 14 years are completed. It came to pass. It means the 14 years are completed. And Jacob is saying, it's time for me to leave. So I want to take my wives, my maidservants with me, all the children that they've born. I want to go south to the land of Canaan. After all, it is the promised land. I told God if he would bring me back to the promised land, I would serve him, dedicate my life to him, consider him my God. So he wants to go away. So Yaakov says, give me my wives and my children for whom I have served you, and let me go, for you know my service which I have done for you. So it sounds like to me here that Yaakov has worked for 14 years for no pay, but he got two wives and two concubines and a bunch of sons and a daughter in the deal. But it sounds like that the only thing he was working for was his family. He was working for his wage was the family. That was the deal. So he hasn't gotten any income. So so he wants to go home now and start with the family that he's got and make a living for himself. And Laban said to him, please stay if I found favor in your eyes, for I have learned by experience that the Lord has blessed me for your sake. Now, that's a great insight on Laban's part, because, having Yaakov working for him has prospered him. Yaakov's done a good job for him. He has not drawn any wages. So Laban has gotten free labor at only the cost of his daughters and the maidservants in his house. I'm sure he provided shelter and food for Yaakov and his family. But I think no income other than that. Then he said, name me your wages and I will give it. So Laban is saying, okay, you have fulfilled the previous contract that we made. You worked as long as you said you would for the daughters, so you've got them and you've got children. But he says, now just tell me how much you want me to pay you and I'll give you wages. So this seems to be the first discussion of wages. So Yaakov said to him, you know how I've served you and how your flock or how your livestock has been with me. For what you had before I came was little, and it has increased to a great amount. The Lord has blessed you since my coming, And now, when shall I also provide for my house? So this was the basis of Laban's statement that God has blessed him, Laban, and his household, because Jacob is working for him, and he's happy about that. And now he's saying, well, I'd like you to stay on a little longer and continue to bring blessings my way, but it's only right that I pay you wages. So he's saying, let's have a contract talk here, and I'll pay you your wages. And Jacob's statement here, and now when shall I provide for my own house, sounds to me like he hasn't gotten any wages. And all the flocks and herds that he's been taking care of belong to Laban. So Yaakov said, I'm sorry, Laban said, what shall I give you? And Yaakov said, you shall not give me anything. If you will do this thing for me, I will again feed and keep your flocks. So Jacob is saying, I don't want any money, but I want part of the what? The operation. I want part of the business. I want part of the livestock. So Yaakov says, let me pass through all your flock today, removing from there all the speckled and spotted sheep, and all the brown ones among the lambs, and the spotted and speckled among the goats, and these shall be my wages. Now, I'm guessing that he probably would not have suggested this unless we'll just call it the colored sheep. Most sheep are white, and so there are going to be an odd few that are in there that have spots and speckles and brown ones and stuff like that. But it's going to be the minority. And Jacob says, just give me the ones that are obviously unique. I will take those off your hands, and I'll take care of them for a matter of years into the future here. And I will trust God to use this portion of the livestock, which I will claim as my own, and that way God can prosper me. So if Laban just gave him money, he could spend it and then it'd be gone. But if he gave him livestock, then that is a renewable resource. As long as these animals are healthy and reproducing, Jacob can just get richer and richer. So this is a good suggestion, and it's an honest one. It's an honest one. So my righteousness will answer for me in time to come when the subject of my wages comes before you. Everyone that is not speckled or spotted among the goats and the brown among the lambs will be considered stolen if it is with me. So everyone that is not colored will be yours. And if you find any of those not colored ones, then I will have stolen and should be treated as a thief. So I'm going to deal honestly with you. Give me the colored animals, and I'll take it from there. And so he says, my righteousness will answer for me. And uh, this is again related to the biblical understanding that God is responsible for conception and birth. So, if God considers me a dirty rat like Bob does, then my flocks and herds are not going to prosper. But if God likes me and, wants to reward me with blessings, then my colored animals will grow. There will be more of them, and that will make me rich. And Laban said, oh, that it were according to your word. In other words, it sounds like a great idea. You're not asking me for too much. You're only going to take a small portion of my flocks and herds. You've already told me you're going to work for me, and so you'll take care of my flocks and herds and your flocks and herds. Sounds like a good deal. So that's what Laban says. But then in verse 35, it says, so later he, and this is Laban, removed that day the male goats that were speckled and spotted, and all the female goats that were speckled and spotted, every one that had some white in it, and all the brown ones among the lambs, and gave them into the hand of his sons. Now, this is the first time that Laban's sons are mentioned. And Not sure what to make of this because normally the sons would be in charge of the flocks and herds, but when we meet Lavan's family at first, Rachel is out there shepherding the sheep. So where did these sons come from? Well, maybe they're younger. He's been working there 14 years, so maybe these are young guys. But anyway, Lavan goes through the flocks and he takes all these ones that Yaakov can lay claim to and puts them in the hands of his sons, whoever the sons were. And the word ben here is it's not a real technically specific word. So it can be, you could use it with reference to farm hands, like hired hands. You could use it with like extended family members, like nephews and stuff like that, grandsons. It can mean a lot of things. So I'm not sure who these sons are, but they get these flocks, and then Lavan, put 3 days' journey between himself and Yaakov. And Yaakov fed the rest of Laban's flocks, which seemed to be all pretty much colored, or which seemed to be all, pretty much white. All the colored ones seemed to have disappeared. And Jacob said, the plan was for Jacob to go through the flocks and he would take all the colored ones. Well, all the colored ones are gone when he goes through the flock, but he's not to be undone. So who's cheating here? It's Lavan. He seems to be the dirty rat. Now, Yaakov took for himself rods of green poplar. So these would be tree branches, and of almond and chestnut trees. So a variety of different kinds of tree branches. He cuts them off the trees and he peeled white strips in them. So he peels some of the bark off of the branches so that they have the appearance of white stripes, like the white inner wood shows through the darker bark, and expose the white which was in the rods. And the rods which he had peeled, he set before the flocks in the gutters. So the gutters would be like the feeding troughs. And I don't know much about shepherding, but I understand that during the appropriate season, when the mating season for the sheep and the goats, they come to the feeding troughs, and like while the females are feeding there, the males do their male thing, and hopefully the females will conceive. But Jacob has he's manufactured, fabricated these striped tree branches, and he puts them in front of the females while they are in the process of conception, while they're feeding at the feeding troughs. What is it with these tree branches? What is it with these rods? Well, I've never heard anything like this, and I've even talked to a farmer that I know pretty well and asked him, is there anything to this? I mean, could this actually? Obviously, what he's hoping will take place is that these white sheep will conceive from these white males, sheep and goats, and conceive spotted ones. And he thinks the thing that's going to do it is putting these tree branches with stripes and spots. He thinks it's going to make them conceive colored animals, colored baby sheep and goats. And I thought that this farmer would say, "Oh, that's ridiculous. There's nothing to it." But he kind of said, "Yeah, maybe so, maybe not." But he didn't disregard it. So I don't know. Maybe this is something in husbandry where it sounds like another superstition to me. Dake says here, Jacob tampered with nature, but whether this caused him any prosperity is not certain, because it indicates that God was helping him. So it could be that, like, Jacob is saying, Lord, even though I've been cheated here, I want to give you an opportunity to bless me. So, Lord, you can take a bunch of white sheep and goats and turn them into spotted ones through the process of reproduction. And, maybe the Lord told him to do this thing with these rods, or maybe, Jacob said, well, I heard somewhere, or maybe this was a common practice to produce colored animals. But anyway, for whatever reason, those rods are out there. And so, um, he set them before the gutters, before the feeding troughs and the watering troughs where the flocks came to drink so that they should conceive when they came to drink. So the flocks conceived before the rods, and the flocks brought forth streaked, speckled, and spotted. Now, the only other thing that I've heard similar to this is that I believe this is from the Little House on the Prairie series of books, which is, it's about a farm family, pioneers in the Midwest, the upper Midwest. And I believe this story comes from there. It talks about a girl that the Ingalls family knew that conceived, and while she was pregnant, I think she was scared by a bear or like some hairy kind of animal. And when she gave birth, the baby was like covered with animal fur, which just sounds absolutely bizarre to me. But the only thing that kind of, has a ring of um, similarity to this is that story. So is it possible that a mom, when she conceives or even after she conceives, if she sees a visual image that impacts her tremendously with fear, or maybe not even fear, something else, that it can affect the appearance of the child that's given birth to? So this is way out of my field. And like I say, it sounds like a lot of superstition and old wives' tales and, however you want to label this, mythology or whatever. But this story is in the Bible. So for whatever reason, the flocks brought forth streaked, speckled, and spotted. So you got some colored animals here. I chalk it up to God's blessing. I would say God can take white animals and turn them into spotted just by the power of his might and his love for Jacob. So a dirty deal was done here, but it's not Jacob who did it. Jacob got the dirty end of the stick here. So now we have this story, and so far Jacob is still a Tom. He is still a morally upright person. Then verse 40, then Yaakov separated the lambs and made the flocks face toward the streaks, and all the brown in the flock of Laban, and he put his own flocks by themselves and did not put them with Laban's flock. So he's keeping these colored ones. It sounds like he's keeping the colored ones separate, which may mean he's just claiming them as his own, or he doesn't want Laban's white animals to see these colored ones. Because so he doesn't want, I'm just not sure what to make of this. So he separates the lambs and made the flocks face toward the street, and all the brown of the flock of Laban, and he put his own flocks by themselves and did not put them with Laban's flock. So he's not mixing the two together. And it came to pass, whenever the stronger livestock conceived, that Yaakov placed the rods before the eyes of the livestock in the gutters, that they might conceive among the rods. So he's differentiating between the weak animals and the strong animals. He puts the rods in front of the strong animals, so these will be the better animals. And I suppose strong would be like what? The most fertile as well. So he's playing his game with these rods, and the conception and birth of these animals. But when the flocks were feeble, he did not put them in. So the feebler were Laban's and the stronger were Jacob's. Now this sounds a little underhanded, but I mean, really, Jacob's doing his job. He's taking care of Laban's flocks and he's taking care of his own. And he's using whatever bizarre methods he's got here to make his own flock stronger and better. Thus, the man became exceedingly prosperous and had large flocks, female and male servants and donkeys, and camels and donkeys. So that brings us to the end of chapter 30. This is a good place for us to stop, and we will say a blessing here, and then hope you will join us for the next video, which will be chapter 31, which is just a continuation of this story. So yeah, let me give you the priestly blessing from the Old Testament. We'll do it first in Hebrew and then in English. I am going to say the sacred name of God. If you don't want to hear it with your ears, I encourage you to turn down your volume or stop the video now. And here it is from Numbers chapter 6. Yivarechecha Yahweh, vayishmarecha, Ya'er Yahweh, panav elecha, vayuchanecha. Isa Yahweh, panav elecha, vayasem lecha shalom. And that means the Lord bless you and keep you. The Lord make his face shine upon you and be gracious to you. The Lord lift up his countenance on you and give you peace. In Yeshua's name, hope to see you next time.